In the not-too-distant future, not next Sunday AD, there's a strange man named Saul who wants body parts cut out by Caprice. She's his assistants. They do performance art to show that these parts are not something that the government should watch and clamp down on this event. But it's David Cronenberg who did Crimes of the Future, you see. He wrote, directed it, and Neon Studios produced it. We have this weird body horror event with some weird meta commentary and some gore effects as you would expect from a Cronenberg flick. But yes, Crimes of the Future is from Neon Studios, written, directed, produced, coffee by, and crazy ideas from David Cronenberg wrapped up in this film that's pretty much like a lot of his films. And if you're familiar with the name David Cronenberg, but you just can't quite place the films, well, let me name some of them. Rabid, Scanners, Videodrome, The Fly, Naked Lunch, Crash, Existence with the big X and a small Z. So you know it's from Maximum Cool. It came out in 1999 when everything was Z. Anybody remember the fucking, time when people would say, everything's Zed, man? Also, History of Violence and Eastern Promises. Much like those last two movies, Viggo Mortensen is in this. And oh boy, Viggo Mortensen, he suffered some kind of injury where he was really, really labored during this. Read up on it, you'll understand what I mean. And Léa Seydoux, I assume that's how you pronounce it. She's French. She was in Blue is the Warmest Color, and in the last couple Bond movies, she's a fucking gorgeous, gorgeous, sultry French woman who's actually a very terrific actress. I actually love Blue is the Warmest Color, not just for the prolonged sex scenes. And boy, if you read up on that movie, that director was a piece of shit, but she was great in it. And also, Kristen Stewart's in this, and Scott Speedman, and a few other people. Okay, here's the best way I can describe this plot. In the not-too-distant future, as I said, humans are evolving in this toxic environment. They don't necessarily feel pain anymore. But they don't even like to have sex the old way. How do they like to have sex? There are people that love to cut each other up, do surgical shows, like Viggo Mortensen's Saul and Caprice, played by Léa. And she's his assistant. She's a former trauma surgeon, and she bonded with him, and now he's got these mysterious conditions where his body is just rapidly growing these strange organs, and basically he's having them cut out because he doesn't understand them, and they're taking it on the road and doing performance art, and people love it. This movie also was apparently filmed inside one lone warehouse in Athens, Greece. Good for them. Don't know why they had to go to fucking Greece to do that, but nevertheless, they're in a warehouse, and Cronenberg's known for making movies that, while they have some minimalist, characters, like they just, they have just one particular, singular vision. Sometimes they can have little bits of meta commentary sprinkled in. I'm going to be perfectly honest, though, as far as, the story goes, besides that particular point, there's also a side plot about a boy that was eating plastic. It was fantastic. And something about the mother and father being a little bit at odds with each other. And also there's a government agency that is overseeing all this stuff going on with people evolving, and whether all these, synthetic organs or whatever organs are developing could actually, make them to where they're not classified as human anymore. Does it sound confusing? Well, don't worry. It'll get even more confusing if you decide to watch this. If you're a big David Cronenberg fan, you're going to have one of two opinions here. You're going to think this is really good to great Cronenberg, or you're going to think this is bad Cronenberg. He's two halves of the same goddamn coin. He has some really great ideas. Some of the movies I mentioned there, Scanners, while definitely weird, and Videodrome, while not being particularly the best goddamn movie, certainly has some good ideas. But The Fly is probably the most commercial of his body horror movies. And then after that, Crash was certainly weird. Very, very fucking weird. And History of Violence and Eastern Promises actually were probably the two most grounded movies that he ended up doing later in his career. This is kind of a return to form. Also, it's an example of Neon Studios kind of being like A24, except with A24, they do 90 to 10, good to fucking legendary, and 10% bad. And Neon Studios is more like 75 to 25. Now, I want you to guess where I thought that this movie fell. I'm not the biggest Cronenberg fan, but I appreciate the fact that he will do the body horror well. And when he hits on a really good idea and does a great goddamn movie, he can do something fucking incredible. I'm going to say right now, I don't fucking get the hype with this at all. I'm sure there are some Cronenberg fans that will say that I just didn't get it and that this movie, that the themes went over my head. I don't think this movie had any themes. To me, I don't think that this movie was nearly as grand and grandiose about, its ideas and the toxic environment and the fact that, humans will evolve and people can either accept it and accept their evolution because it is a mystery. And, because it becomes a footnote in history. I'm pretty certain those weren't the lyrics for the goddamn Motorhead song, and non-wrestling fans have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm pretty certain this movie is going to be one of the most divisive of the year. I will say I didn't like it. And I wanted to like it. I wanted to give it a chance because I like the cast, and while not being the biggest Cronenberg fan, again, I appreciate what he can do. It had a good idea. It just didn't execute at all. In fact, I think this movie pretty much just had a bunch of characters doing things, and it was under the guise of having this great idea, but all they did was just stuff, and there was some cool body horror stuff that eventually just got hollow, and in fact, I would describe this movie as being very, very hollow. I think David Cronenberg has lost his goddamn mind, and I don't mean in a good way. I mean, he's got to be almost 80 by this point. I don't think that he has it anymore. I think he pretty much lost it, and this is likely his swan song as far as doing any kind of throwback to the late 70s, 80s, into the early 90s, body horror, weird stuff that he did. There just wasn't a lot of meat to this. Ironic, considering that they were cutting up bodies and doing some weird stuff. The acting in particular, I don't really know if the acting was meant to just be mundane because everybody experiences, because sex is the new surgery or surgery is the new sex, where people basically don't feel that much pain anymore, so they have to cut themselves so they just feel alive because they're in a desolate world. And the world does feel pretty goddamn desolate, I will say that, but everybody kind of acts like they're just some fucking quaaludes. Viggo Mortensen in particular, I mean, I know that he's dealing with a whole lot of shit that he doesn't quite understand, some that he does, some that he doesn't. And there's some other characters just get introduced, and him and I guess Leah's Caprice is probably the best role. Kristen Stewart was very disappointing in this because she was just constantly breathing weird, like she was struggling to say words without taking about 15 breaths between them. I don't know, it was just really, really odd. I don't think Cronenberg hit the mark here. In fact, I think that he completely fucking missed it, despite trying some things. It just felt very samey. It felt like he was really trying to recreate what felt organic, ironic, again, because of body horror. It just felt like he was trying to recreate his past stuff when he was revered as a director, as opposed to being definitely appreciated as being one of those bonkers out there directors. It just didn't feel like it necessarily connected. It's going to connect with some people. There are some people that are going to love it. Again, I had really no views going into it. I was like, okay, it's Cronenberg. I'm not the biggest fan, but let me give it a shot. And after a bit of all right, cool, I'm with you so far with the opening. And then it started to lose me. And then it really started to lose me. In fact, the precise moment the movie lost me was when they just kept introducing characters and doing weird stuff. And it's not even the lack of explanation. You can come up with your own interpretations if you want, but it was just when they kept heaping stuff. And the fact that there was this life form software deal that was going on, these two women techs that come around and fix all this stuff. Apparently they're the only two techs qualified to do this. Also, this toxic environment seems to be populated by maybe 100 people, which sure might have had something to do with the pandemic, might have had something to do with just the fact that humanity's basically wiped out, but just it didn't work. It did not work. Ultimately, that's how I really felt about it. I am going to get into spoilers here in a little bit. At least the spoilers as best as I can get. But ultimately, it was just, it just missed the mark. It just completely missed the mark. And Cronenberg, this was a rotten egg that he basically laid. It was a dud. It did not work. And ultimately just left everybody, it basically left me feeling hollow. And judging by the reactions I've read, from other people, viewers were very, very fucking divided on. Some people loved it. I gotta be on the other side of the camp. I hate to say it, but I gotta say I ultimately hated this movie. I didn't want to hate it, But it didn't, it just had no cohesive narrative. It didn't really have much of a narrative. It just ended up having people do things, and then eventually it ended, and I'm like, okay, that was certainly something. So let's get into spoilers. 3, 2, 1, spoilers. Okay, so there's a boy named Brecken that eats plastic. It's fantastic, and his mother doesn't like this, so she smothers him because she's upset at her husband, because her husband ended up helping create him. How did he help create him? It turns out this husband, Lang, played by Scott Speedman, is one of those evolving people where him and a bunch of people have created these plastic-type purple candy bars. They're synth bars. It's basically a way to eat plastic waste, and find a way to evolve. And those that can eat it are evolving. He was able to pass this stuff on genetically to his son, at least as best as I could interpret it. And Viggo Mortensen's character basically wanders around kind of looking like a dilapidated version of an Assassin's Creed character. And he ends up in this weird chair that's like supposed to help feed him and stuff like that. It's this weird body horror chair. Kind of looks like a bunch of face huggers, human centipede together. And he isn't handling the food all that well. Now, why isn't he handling the food? Well, he keeps cutting these synth organs out that his body keeps growing, because evolution is a mystery. And there's government agent Timlin, and there's also Whip It. Whip it good. Do. Crack that whip. Kristen Stewart could whip me and I wouldn't be upset. Moving on from that, maybe I do have a few issues. Caprice, being a surgeon and doing these performance art pieces, she gets the crazy idea, like after seeing somebody fuck up her own face, to do weird stuff to her face, and she wants to do more. She wants to help perform this autopsy. Lang basically says, I don't want the police to have my son's body. You do it and figure out what's there. Well, there's also this new Vice government agency dealie that is talking to Saul. The guy's named Cope. That's the character's name. And he finds that basically he's talking to Saul while Saul's talking to other people, and it's this weird stuff. It's like this weird body horror play that's playing out on film. And eventually they do this autopsy, and what happens in this autopsy is all these organs are marked, because I guess when you have synth organs, they're marked by the government, tattooed by the government. But maybe they were his organs, maybe they weren't his organs. And then Lang gets killed by being drilled by 2 women. Literally, I'm not kidding. They fucking drill him. It's actually fucking hilarious. Stuff just happens, and that's really about it with this movie. There's not a lot to it, and nothing really gets accomplished. We kind of end up back in the same area where maybe Viggo Mortensen feels pain, maybe he doesn't. Also, he eats one of those synth bars, and it turns out he feels fine, because that's what his body needs. His body needs the plastics. His body needs basically to feed on this waste, and he's been resisting it. Now that he's not resisting it, now he can achieve whatever this evolution has done. Okay, again, I may be misinterpreting this whole goddamn movie, but that's what I got out of it. And I'm sorry, despite the body horror, and despite the cast, and despite what attempts were made by this movie to be anything good, it gets an F. It gets an F because it is one of the worst movies I've seen this year. Not because I didn't understand it, just because it ultimately shot for the moon and crashed down to Earth. And I don't think it was nearly the great social commentary and the great, thing about how humanity will eat itself alive and humanity will just become all depressed and consume itself because, we're going to fuck up the world, I guess. Anyway, F, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritlin. I'll see you soon.